New York, commonly known as the Empire State, stands as one of the most populous states in the United States. Emerging from the era of the original 13 colonies, New York State boasts a rich and captivating history that beckons exploration. The indigenous tribes were the earliest known dwellers of what we now recognize as New York State. Their presence in the region dates back to approximately 10,000 BC, and they inhabited the area for centuries. Among these tribes were the Iroquois, who migrated from nearby regions to join the indigenous communities within New York's borders. At the onset of European exploration along the eastern coast of America, New York was inhabited by several indigenous tribes which could be classified into two main linguistic groups: the Iroquoian-speaking tribes and the Algonquian-speaking tribes. The Iroquoian-speaking tribes, comprising the Seneca, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, and Cayuga, were part of the first group. The second group, the Algonquian-speaking tribes, encompassed tribes like the Lenni Lenape, Mohegan, and Wappinger. The indigenous communities of this region had evolved sophisticated systems of economy, agriculture, and culture, alongside a notable alliance known as the Iroquoian Confederacy. However, none of these advancements mattered significantly to the Europeans, as they inevitably made their way to the eastern coast of the New World. Two explorers initially encountered the lands of New York, but their contributions upon arrival were relatively minor and are not widely credited. In 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano, an Italian explorer working for the French, was navigating the Atlantic when he stumbled upon what we now recognize as New York Harbor, including modern-day Manhattan. He documented his exploration, but like Verrazzano, he did little in terms of colonizing New York. Similarly, Jacques Cartier, another French explorer, undertook similar expeditions in 1535, yet his efforts towards colonization were minimal. It wasn't until Henry Hudson, employed by the Dutch East India Company, arrived in New York in 1609 that colonization became a serious intention. Unlike the earlier explorers, Hudson's mission on behalf of the Dutch was to establish the foundations of a colony. Consequently, in 1614, the Dutch constructed the first European settlement within the boundaries of what is now New York. Fort Nassau, overseen by Hendrik Christiansen, was situated near present-day Albany and served primarily as a trading post, specifically catering to the thriving fur trade. By the mid-1620s, several Dutch families had immigrated to the fledgling colony, encouraged by incentives for merchants and other settlers to relocate. This nascent colony was named New Netherland, and by 1624, the settlement we now recognize as New York was established as New Amsterdam. A more permanent settlement, Fort Orange, eventually supplanted Fort Nassau as the Dutch headquarters in New York. Immigrants from various parts of Europe were already flocking to the burgeoning colony, enticed by the promise of a fresh start and a better life. For the Dutch, however, a significant challenge arose as the English coveted what they had established. Amidst the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the entire colony of New Netherland came under English control and was subsequently renamed New York. The city of New Amsterdam was also unceremoniously renamed New York, mirroring the change in the colony's name. However, the Dutch briefly regained control of it in 1673 during the Third Anglo-Dutch War. Instead of reverting to its previous name, the Dutch temporarily called the city New Orange. However, this change lasted only a year until the English regained control. Despite these shifts in leadership, the colony, now known as New York, continued to thrive and expand under its new ownership. When the English took control, the settlement boasted an estimated maximum population of 8,000 residents. Approximately a century later, it had swelled to around 160,000 inhabitants. As was the case initially, many Europeans sought refuge in the New World due to famine, religious persecution, economic hardships, or other challenges in their homelands. Indeed, for many, the allure of new opportunities and the prospect of a better life drove them to New York. The colony's economy flourished, with agriculture playing a particularly crucial role in its success. While some colonists developed amicable relationships with their indigenous neighbors, others did not share the same sentiment. The French, with their own colonial aspirations in the surrounding regions, sponsored several Catholic missions that extended into the territories of present-day New York. Religious and commercial pursuits often brought the French into direct confrontation with the British, yet these endeavors also facilitated the formation of significant alliances and friendships with native tribes. Tensions eventually escalated into the French and Indian War, during which indigenous peoples fought alongside both the British and the French. The eventual British victory in 1763 resulted in the loss of France's territorial claims in New York. New York experienced a brief respite from hostilities, but as the notion of independence from British rule began to gain momentum among the American colonies, the rumblings of war could already be felt in the air. The controversial Stamp Act of 1765 catapulted New York to the forefront of the independence movement in the colonies, aided by the Sons of Liberty. Despite opposition from some New Yorkers to the idea of breaking free from British rule, there was little that could be done to halt the downward spiral. With war looming on the horizon, there remained only hope that the path to independence would unfold smoothly. Nearly one-third of all battles fought during the American Revolution took place on New York's contested soil. General George Washington devoted considerable attention to the struggle for New York. When independence was declared in the summer of 1776, New York had endorsed the Declaration of Independence. Despite the British holding New York City captive throughout the war, the local inhabitants fought fiercely to liberate their entire territory. When the war finally ended and all of New York was restored to the Americans, the recaptured city of New York City briefly served as the nation's capital. New York State became the 11th state to ratify the new United States Constitution, securing its place within the Union. Indeed, the 1777 Constitution of New York served as a significant inspiration for the federal Constitution adopted in 1788. Additionally, New York City served as the capital of both the state and the nation intermittently until 1797, when New Yorkers relocated their political center to Albany. New York has indeed been the backdrop for numerous pivotal moments in American history. The Bill of Rights was drafted within the state's borders, and New York City hosted George Washington's inauguration as the first president of the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court had its beginnings there, and the founding of the New York Stock Exchange is a notable event in the state's history, among many other crucial occurrences. The War of 1812 once again turned New York into a battleground, echoing the conflicts of the Revolutionary War. Despite the ongoing strife, New York continued to experience growth and development in various aspects. Over time, the state's success became less reliant on agriculture as other industries began to flourish. New transportation innovations, such as steamboats and trains, made New York a convenient hub for travel and commerce. The opening of the Erie Canal further enhanced the state's appeal, providing a significant boost to its transportation infrastructure and economic growth. By this time, indigenous peoples were largely confined to a dozen reservations, while others had been forcibly relocated or perished due to their support for the British during the Revolutionary War. Amidst these reservations, a burgeoning list of towns, businesses, schools, farms, churches, theaters, and athletic facilities began to take shape. Additionally, a growing sentiment of abolitionism permeated the state, reflecting a burgeoning movement against slavery. By the mid-19th century, Governor William H. Seward collaborated with the state legislature in New York to safeguard and extend the rights of both runaway slaves and free blacks within the state. Despite hosting some hesitant Democrats, the state of New York swiftly rallied behind the efforts of Abraham Lincoln with the outbreak of the Civil War. Ultimately, New York would contribute more manpower to the fighting effort than any other northern state. Unlike the Revolutionary War, not a single battle broke out on New York soil during the Civil War. In 1863, significant unrest erupted among the locals when the Union implemented a draft law requiring all male citizens between the ages of 20 and 35, as well as single males up to the age of 45, to be eligible for conscription. The conscription allowed individuals to pay their way out of military service, but not all New Yorkers could afford this option. In mid-July, massive and violent protests erupted across New York City, known as the Draft Riots. These demonstrations were primarily led by ethnic Irish New Yorkers and frequently targeted Black Americans and their communities, resulting in a significant exodus of the latter from certain areas. The unrest began to subside when the North decided to permit some Black Americans to enlist in their own regiments, alleviating concerns among European Americans that the draft was displacing them from job opportunities and favoring free Black men instead. With the end of the war came a new wave of immigration and increased freedoms for Black New Yorkers. A significant portion of New York's burgeoning population consisted of European immigrants, with many arriving from Germany, Italy, Ireland, and Eastern Europe. However, there was also a notable influx of Chinese immigrants beginning around 1850. New York was becoming increasingly diverse and exceptionally prosperous as a state, with a growing influx of workers contributing to its economic success. By the turn of the 20th century, the population of New York State had surpassed 7 million. These millions of New Yorkers would witness the unfolding events of the 1900s, including the World Wars, the Great Depression, and the dawn of the modern era. Today, New York continues to be one of the most populous states in the U.S. and remains one of the nation's most popular tourist destinations. Modern New Yorkers have experienced their own share of tragedy and triumph, much like their ancestors before them. Indeed, the history of New York State is intricately woven into the fabric of the nation, and its contributions have had a profound impact on the course of American history. Without New York, the United States would undoubtedly be a vastly different place today.